Welcome back to another episode of the Sunday Stache. This is episode number 17, and one thing that I had not talked about last week in regards to Twitter that I wanted to mention because I had kind of forgotten about it, and this is just one more reason as to the reason why Twitter is an absolute mess, in my opinion, is that they actually allow porn on there, and I'm not talking about just like nudes. They actually allow hardcore stuff to be uploaded onto their platform. And I don't want to sit here and sound prudish or anything like that, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but when viewed from this idea that Twitter is this great place to join up and have a discussion and all that kind of stuff, it just doesn't really make much sense to me. I don't see how the community guidelines can allow for porn stars to put up naked pictures and upload videos of them having sex, but misgendering somebody is wrong. It just doesn't make much sense to me. Seems a little bit backwards, but I'm also not saying that we should take the porn down. I believe in the free expression, but I think that we should take, or that they should take, a harder look at things that they are allowing on the platform and the things that they don't. By the way, all you have to do is click on the disclaimer to view the porn on there. Pretty much the same as the regular internet. All you got to do is say, I'm above 18, or it's something like that. It's fairly easy, and with the increasing number of kids and people that are under the age of 18 on the internet and that have phones, I find it odd that they would be promoting something like that on their platform. Especially today with this weird trend that we have in the United States with the sexualization of children. When I was younger, girls didn't wear tight-fitting clothing. Their shorts were mildly shorter than what the guys wore, and their t-shirts were pretty loose-fitting. Now it's weird because teenagers are wearing clothing that they definitely shouldn't be, and that should definitely be left for the adults. And honestly, TikTok, in my opinion, is making it so much more harmful and so much worse. As well as Netflix. For anybody who doesn't know, that film, the weird film that came out a while ago that everybody had a really, hard time with or difficult time with, Cuties, that's still up. And Netflix added 8 million users this past quarter. So it's not like they're losing any kind of popularity. So just wanted to talk about that real quick before I actually get into the topics of the week. So anyway, I got 3 for this week. I want to talk about some European soccer updates. It's a sport that I personally pay attention to, and some pretty, interesting stuff happened this week. Here in the United States, obviously we had Joe Biden's inauguration, and the last thing I wanted to cover is a little bit of news bias, so we'll get into it. So European soccer, there's actually a couple of things that happened, and the first one that I wanted to talk about, big news, I guess, is Messi. He got a red card this week. So according to ESPN, and I was trying to find how many games he's played and all that kind of stuff. So according to ESPN, he's played 753 matches for Barcelona without getting a red card. And he has received some red cards while playing for Argentina in international play, but none playing for Barcelona until this past week. He got his first red card playing for Barcelona in a loss against Athletic Bilbao in the Spanish Super Cup. So he has a total of 3 red cards in his entire career. His first one actually came in 2005 in his debut with Argentina against Hungary, where Messi, he came off of the bench, and from what I understand, he wasn't off of the bench for very long, and there was a Hungarian player that was tugging on his jersey, and he kind of swung back to kind of brush him off a little bit, and it seemed as though it was kind of in frustration, and he was shown a red card for this. Then he stayed out of the book for a while, and he ended up getting his second red card with Argentina when he was playing in the 2019 Copa America against Chile. And I was watching this game, and I remember at the time when they gave the red card, it was very I guess, very confusing because as I was watching it, it really didn't seem as though there was much happening. It was both Messi and Medel, I think that's how you pronounce his name, a Chilean player, and obviously Messi is Argentine. And they were both shown red cards, but it was just like I don't want to say a scuffle, but it was just a small scuffle at, at the, I guess just the right side of the Chilean goal. And I don't know. I don't really think that the red card was deserved. They were just in it. It was heated in the moment and stuff. I think the referee was probably just trying to say, that's not how I'm going to, it's not how you guys are going to play this game. So I kind of understand why he was given red there, but I don't necessarily agree with it. And his last and most recent red card is his third one. And that's, he was playing against Athletic Bilbao. And, I honestly, this was by far the most deserved red card. He was he actually hit the guy in the head, like hands to the head. And I didn't watch the whole game, so I didn't see the context of where he hit the player. But he did swing at the guy's head. And the reason I mention the context is because with Messi being so good, what happens with him typically is people will, I don't want to say target him, but they'll guard him to where the point where he doesn't get the ball as often as he should, and he doesn't really play, I guess, he doesn't really play as much of a role. If they try to get him out of the game, then what'll happen is that he won't play as much of a role. So that's why I mentioned the context. I'm not making an excuse for him swinging at the guy's head and hitting him in the head. I do think that he deserved a red card for that, but I do think that at some level we do have to take into consideration the fact that people do tend to target Messi with all of this. I think the same goes for Ronaldo as well, and any good player. If you're on the opposing team and there's a really good player, you're going to end up trying to cover that guy a little bit more with your best player, or you're just going to try to get him frustrated to the point where he acts out and he ends up getting thrown out of the game. So I get what they were doing. I definitely think that his red card was deserved. So in addition to that, he has a decent amount of yellow cards. It's not an outrageous amount. He's got 131, so it's not really all that bad. He's pretty good at not getting red cards. To have played as many matches as he has and only have 3, I think that's pretty good. So when compared to some of the other players that get red cards and everything, Messi is doing pretty good in my opinion. And some of the people that are on the top of that list, I'm only going to go through a couple of them. I've got 5 here. There's Geraldo Bedoya. He is number 1 by far. He has 46 total red cards in his career. He was a Colombian defender. He started in 1995 and he finished his playing career in 2015. And he actually played for 14 different clubs through South and Central America. So it makes sense, defender. So you're going to end up getting those red cards for that. The next guy, number 2 on the list, Krill Rule. He is a French midfielder, and he started playing in 1993, and he finished his career in 2010. He played the majority of his career at Nice and around France. So he actually has a total of 27 red cards. Then number 3, he's still an active player, Sergio Ramos. He's a Spanish defender, and he started his career in 2003, obviously still playing today, and the vast majority of his career has been at Real Madrid, and obviously playing for the Spanish national team. Number 4, Alexis Ruano, and he has 22 red cards. He's a Spanish defender. He started playing in 2002, and he is still playing today, although I don't think he's playing for a mainstream team. So anyway, he played all over Spain and Portugal, and then he recently went to Saudi Arabia, played there for a season, and came back. So I'm not sure if he's actually still playing or not, but what I could find is he's attached to a team. So then last guy, number 5 on the list, Paulo Montero. He has 21. He is a Uruguayan center back, and he started his career in 1990 and ended in 2007, and he played most of his time in Italy at both Atalanta and Juventus. So, those guys, it makes sense. A lot of these guys are defenders. Same goes for Messi. I mean, Messi's not a defender. He's a attacker. So it makes sense that a defender is going to end up having a lot of red cards. To go with some context, I think Ronaldo has 11 red cards as a striker. So I think Messi's doing pretty good with red cards. It's just big news that somebody who has played as many games as he has and is as popular as he is, got a red card. So, like I said, many of those guys, they are deserving of the red cards. They're really hard fouls. If you go and look up their names, you look up the top, Google this stuff, you're going to end up seeing they're hard fouls. They're fighting, dangerous tackles. It's things like that. So, I will say today the game is way different. We have VAR, and the VAR, what it'll do is it'll actually go and review red cards and to see if it is actually deserving. I've actually seen them give red cards because of a VAR review, and I've actually seen them take red cards away because of a VAR review. Now, with that being said, some leagues have VAR, some leagues don't. Some competitions have VAR, some competitions don't. I want to say a couple of years ago, and I'll bring up Ronaldo because his most recent red card was against Valencia. Basically what happened was it looked like he had kind of like hit him on the head or pulled his hair or did something. Basically they got in a scuffle, and I say a scuffle, but they were just kind of jockeying for position, and the Valencia player fell down. He ended up, Ronaldo like kind of touched his head, and the way it looked, I guess what they did was they gave Ronaldo a red card, and I want to say that was a Champions League game, and I think that in that year of the Champions League, they were not doing VAR reviews. So it was really kind of weird, and probably not a actual deserving red card for Ronaldo. So I'm a Valencia fan, and I thought it was harsh at the time. Obviously happy that Ronaldo's out of the game. I think that it was still harsh, and I don't think he really deserved the red card, but because of VAR and because of the way that it works, it's really kind of weird. That's the other part about these red cards, where you have Geraldo Bedoya, who's most likely, I don't know if anybody is going to be able to pass 46. Sergio Ramos has 20 more to even tie the guy, so I'm not sure if that's going to end up happening. So anyway, speaking of Ronaldo, more news in the soccer world. Ronaldo scored his 760th goal of his career, and he sits alone at the top of the career goals list. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to compare Messi and Ronaldo. I think it's a difficult comparison to do. I do think that it's when you look at those two players, you do have to kind of factor in their ability to bring the team around them up. So it's something to think about. Like I said, I'm not going to end up talking about that. Maybe for another time. So anyway, he scored his 760th goal in a match on Wednesday against Napoli. The second guy, Joseph Bican, he had 759. He is an Austrian Czech striker, playing way back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s range. And evidently, records from the mid-1900s were not really all that good. So, there's some debate as to whether his numbers are accurate or not. Wikipedia totals, Wikipedia has him at the top of the list, and his totals are listed as plus 805 goals and plus 503 matches. So, that kind of means to me that they're pretty unsure of what it is that we're looking at there. I'm sure he was good, and he does have an impressive game to goal ratio. If those numbers are true, it's like, I want to say it was like 1.4 or something like that. The only person on the list that I was able to see that had over a 1 for a goal to game ratio. So he's if that number is true, then it's pretty good. And anyway, the same goes for the next guy on the list, Pele. He had, from what I could see, it was 757. He was a Brazilian striker. He played his entire career with Santos in Brazil. Not the entire thing, but I think it was like 95% of his career was with Santos in Brazil. And his total goals recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records is 1,283 goals in 1,363 games. Now, those actually include friendlies and exhibition matches, which don't count towards the list. So that's a number that seems kind of odd, and that's why I say it's really difficult to put the guy at the top of the list, because you have these guys that are playing in different eras. Every one of Ronaldo's goals is pretty much been recorded on video, or it was recorded officially after records and everything like that had been taken. So anyway, I think maybe some of these numbers they might be kind of unattainable. It's kind of like older like baseball scores, where like somebody like Cal Ripken Jr. He has the most consecutive games played, and the reality is that some of these records aren't going to get beaten. Maybe somebody like Pele, his total goals record might not end up getting beaten, and the reason it might not is because, well, things are different. Like I said, Pele kind of on the same level as Cal Ripken. It's just the guys don't play the same way that they used to. I went to a Juventus and Real Madrid game here in the United States 2 years ago, I think, and it was a International Champions Cup. It was the thing that they did right before the season, and it was right after the World Cup. So I was going there and expecting to see Ronaldo and like all the big name guys play, and Ronaldo was on vacation because he had just actually finished the World Cup that year. So, and what I'm saying about that is the guys don't play like they used to. Whereas in Pele's time, you would play every single game, or in Cal Ripken's time, you played every game. Some of these guys, the teams invest so much money into the players that they make them take time off, and they don't actually get the opportunity to get towards reaching some of those goals. That's why I say some things like Cal Ripken's, that's not going to be something that's a record that's able to be broken. Moving on, in other news, Liverpool, they got beat by Burnley this past week, 1-0, and that actually ended their 68-game home unbeaten record. And they came close to Chelsea's 86-game run, but they ended up falling short. I mean, 68 games is still very, very impressive. So, actually, speaking of Liverpool, as I was recording this, I was kind of had Liverpool playing on my computer in front of me, and they ended up losing to Manchester United. They ended up losing to Manchester United 3-2 in a fourth round of the FA Cup. In addition to Liverpool losing their game, Real Madrid, these big names keep falling. So Real Madrid lost to Alcoyano, which is a Spanish team that it's like, I think, in the Valencia area, and kind of it's a low tier team. And they lost 2-1 in the Copa del Rey round of 32. So their whole team wasn't playing. Their whole first team for Real Madrid wasn't playing, since I think in like Copa del Rey and stuff like that, you don't actually have to play your entire first team. You just have to play a percentage of them. But realistically, in my opinion, that's not much of an excuse. You're Real Madrid. You're a top flight team. You should be able to beat someone like Alcoyano. They're a second division team, and they recently got promoted from the third division. But in my opinion, I think that they definitely should be able. Real Madrid should have been able to beat somebody like that. That wraps up my European soccer news. I know that there's obviously some other countries and stuff there, and there's definitely some things that happened. There's a lot of things that have happened this week. Those are the few that I saw that were more, I guess, stuck out to me. So moving on, topic number 2, we have Joe Biden's inauguration. So obviously the big news of the week is the changing of the presidents. So President Trump is out and President Biden is in. So Wednesday they held the inauguration in Washington, D.C. Chief Justice John Roberts was the person that swore in Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden's inauguration speech, I personally, I listened to it. I thought that he did pretty well during the speech. At one point, I actually had asked somebody that was around me if it was a teleprompter or like a written speech down or something like that, and because I didn't really see him looking around or really looking down or anything like that. And with it being such a long speech, I don't think that he memorized it, but I'm sure he had something that was there. But I think, as far as being able to keep up with the teleprompter or whatever it was that he was using, if it was memorization, that's pretty good. So anyway, the substance of the speech, in my opinion, overall, it was pretty good. He brought up a lot of things in history and talked about how far we've come as far as, like American history and everything. At one point, he says that we need to reject the culture in which facts are manipulated and manufactured. I have said this before. The news does not have an incentive to fact check everything. They need the clicks. So sometimes they publish things without completely doing their due diligence. And additionally, they tend to insert their own bias when reporting on certain subjects. And, I'll get to that in a little bit once I'm done talking about the inauguration, because that is my last topic to cover for the day, which is the news bias. He said he would be the president for all Americans and fight for those who did support him and those who did not. And honestly, I don't necessarily believe that 100% because, you just look at the executive orders that he had passed and he's put in place. One of them was about ending the Keystone Pipeline. And realistically, that is going to end up probably hurting some American jobs. And likely those people that were affected by the Keystone Pipeline, I would assume that they are Trump supporters, since Trump was all about fossil fuels and Joe Biden is not necessarily all about fossil fuels. So I think that that's going to end up hurting some American jobs. I think the idea for that is to push those people into more green environments, something like wind or some renewable energy, as opposed to working in the fossil fuel industry. So maybe if that's the plan, I could get behind that. But as of right now, it doesn't seem as though there's a plan to get those people doing something else. In true middle-class Joe fashion, he talked about the fact that he understands people are worried about their jobs, their homes, their families, and then said the answer is to not turn around and go right back into two separate Americas. He wants to end the battle between the rural and urban areas, the red and the blue, conservative versus liberal, right? And that was, he said, I think all three of those actually. And, I get that. I can get on the same page with that. I agree. The issue becomes when people don't really do that. He's not really wrong about those groups, because we do have issues with, between those, right? Rural is usually red and conservative, right? And urban is usually blue and liberal. And, I had actually talked about that in episode 7 on here, where I talked about the differences between rural and urban voters and why they pick the party that they do. He's calling for unity, but what he needs to do, in my opinion, is he needs to get a hold of his party if he wants the unity. When damn near every single liberal in the media or Democrat in Congress has grouped every single Trump supporter or Trump voter into the people that broke into the Capitol, you're going to see that split. When they group those people together, they're going to end up having disagreements, especially when a lot of the people that actually voted for Trump didn't actually believe in breaking into the Capitol. They actually thought that those people should be arrested, they should be prosecuted and everything. So you're going to see a split when all of those people get lumped into the same category. Additionally to that, when all of these people, they get called racist because of their political beliefs, you're going to end up seeing that split as well. These people, they get very defensive when they're called racist, especially if they feel as though they're not racist, or even if, like, a black person is a Republican or a Trump supporter and then they get called racist or something like that. It's just, you're going to end up seeing that, and we got to get away from lumping everybody into one category because of their political beliefs. The Republicans are always very defensive because there's always some Democrat attacking them personally, instead of talking to them and trying to compromise about a policy. I think in episode 7, I also talked about the fact that there is an overwhelming percentage of black people living in poverty in cities across the United States. And a lot of those cities have been Democrat for a long time. And I'll use Baltimore as an example, since I live kind of close to Baltimore. And I think it's a valid question to ask and to talk about. Why is it, that Baltimore has not had a Republican mayor since 1967, when a Democrat mayor was elected? And ever since then, every single mayor has been Democrat. Right? A mayor is focused on the city, not focused on the country. So, and realistically, 2 of the more recent mayors have actually gotten arrested for some sort of corruption. Sheila Dixon, she was a Democrat who won with 87% of the vote in 2007. And actually, she was later convicted of a few felonies and eventually resigned. And then after her, Catherine Pugh, well, not after her, there was another mayor in the middle. From what I understand, she did fairly good. She ended up she didn't run for re-election. But then Catherine Pugh, who was elected, I think, in 2016, she won with 57% of the vote. And it would actually have been a lot more if it hadn't been for Sheila Dixon, who was a write-in, and actually she got about a little over 20,000 votes in that election. So Sheila Dixon, someone who was a convicted and did some time for corruption, was still getting votes 10 years later. So anyway, then you have Catherine Pugh. She was later convicted after a few years into her term. She was convicted and actually sentenced to 3 years in prison and I think 3 years of probation for tax evasion, fraud, and corruption in connection with selling her self-published Healthy Holly book to the University of Maryland's medical system. So anybody that lives near Baltimore definitely heard about that. Now, moving on to the next, the next mayor, the current mayor right now, is a guy named Brandon Scott. And from what I can gather and understand, he's doing a pretty good job. Hopefully, Baltimore continues to get better from here, and I hope the city goes in the right direction. But I think it's something to understand that Sheila Dixon, who got 87% of the vote back in 2007, she ended up getting she actually almost beat Brandon Scott out for the Democratic primary in the 2020 election. So it seems to me as though people aren't looking back and understanding the history of their city and voting for people who aren't corrupt. Now, obviously, Brandon Scott ended up winning, and I think that, like I said before, I think he's going to end up doing a good job. But Sheila Dixon is still continuing to get votes, even 13 years after 14, or I guess it's maybe like 10 years after she gets in trouble for corruption and stuff like that. So look them up, see what it is that they did. I feel like it's a little too much to talk about because this is not necessarily about I'm not talking about them. I just wanted to talk about the fact that you have corrupt politicians in Baltimore and people continue to try to vote for them. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So moving on with his speech, he said that you have to set aside politics and face this virus. Like you're talking about the COVID stuff. You got to set aside politics and face this virus as one nation. And to do that, we have to get the Republicans and Democrats to stop fighting. And honestly, that is a much, much easier said than done thing, right? You have people who, for the last 10 years, have just been attacking each other. So it's going to be a difficult thing to do. Hopefully, Joe Biden is able to actually do that. One thing that I actually really liked from the speech, it was a quote that he had. I don't know if it's actually from anybody or if it's from him, but he actually said, "We will lead not by the example of our power, but by the power of our example." And I do think that is a good thing, not, showing an example of the the power of the United States, but we will influence people by our example. So I think that was a good thing that he did. Now, he did a moment of silence for, I think it was all the people that died from COVID, and then he put his head back up, and then he ended the prayer, and I think it was a good thing. A little joke here, he didn't say a woman after the prayer, so I think that's progress. Overall, I think it was a good speech. The plan seems to be about unity and bringing the country together, and I really do. I hope that happens. I told a friend of mine the other day that I hoped that he had a successful presidency, and he was shocked that I said that, because that means that all of his crazy policies are passed. And, he said that if all of those policies are passed, then that means that the United States is effectively going to be over. And I don't necessarily agree with all of Joe Biden's policies, but, I do think some of his executive orders have been good, or they are going to be good. There are millions of people that are suffering and unable to pay their rent and their student loans. I think that pausing them is a good thing for people that aren't working. But I do think that long term, there needs to be a solution other than forgiving those debts. So, I still want the country to prosper. I believe that the United States is the greatest place to live in the world. I've not been everywhere, but I have been to some other countries, and I will say that being in the U.S. has been the best by far. The issue that I have with the conversation that I have with my friend is the fact that he said his plan was to be combative the whole time. And obviously, neither of us really have any influence in the world, and we can't really make a difference. But, this is not necessarily how adults should behave. I understand that for 4 years, the Democrats essentially attacked Trump and the Republicans on just about every single policy. They twisted the border into a story that Trump caused it, and, realistically, it was actually the Obama administration that had caused some of the border issues. And then AOC, she goes down to the border, she takes pictures, and she did it at the right angle to show herself crying, but it ended up turning out that it was her crying in front of an empty parking lot. So they were staged pictures. And then they politicized all the stuff with COVID and continued to blame Trump for everything that is realistically a failure of the government altogether. Not just Trump. Also, Trump said that you can't let the solution be worse than the problem. And, places like California, they haven't even opened back up. So obviously their solution, in my opinion, is worse than the problem. So with all that, I do believe that the Republicans are justified in being difficult, right? The Democrats set the precedent, and the Republicans can be difficult, especially, since, in my opinion, if the Democrats get their way, they can just bulldoze the government and push all of their policies through. But I think that the Republicans need to work with the Democrats. Like I said in my last week's episode, my issue with politics today is that no one really kind of jumps that line in the middle, when in reality I think most Americans probably actually fit in the middle. I personally would consider myself just to the right of the middle line. I believe in some policies that are on the left, and I believe in some policies that are on the right. But I would pretty much put myself just to the right of the center line. So anyway, most Americans are not hard left, and most Americans are not hard right. I would say that the vast majority of us probably fit somewhere in the middle. And like I said, the issue that I had with the conversation with my friend is the fact that he, just like the politicians, are essentially acting like children. I hate when I see these people say, "Isn't it so nice to finally have adults back in Washington?" They acted like children before Trump came, and, they will continue to act like children after Trump. He was not the cause of all the problems in our government. I honestly think that he was just a response to the growing number of people that distrust the government, to actually represent us as the American people. Compromise is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward. They have to work together, and that goes for the Democrats now, now that they have power, and that goes for the Republicans whenever it is that they take power back. We will never move forward as long as our retired age politicians continue to behave worse than children. Moving on with the inauguration, as a whole, you had Jennifer Lopez and Garth Brooks. They both performed fairly well. Amanda Gorman, she read a poem, and I think that actually was a pretty good poem. Lady Gaga, she actually performed. Now, the reason I mentioned Lady Gaga is because I have more to say about her last. So Lady Gaga, she actually performed the national anthem, and the performance was pretty good, in my opinion. She's got a very good voice, but I only mention her more is because of the brooch that she was wearing. And it was a huge bird with, I think it was an olive branch in its mouth. In my opinion, and a lot of people online, it was very Hunger Games type, Hunger Games-esque. So she said it was about unity, but I think there might have been a little bit of a deeper meaning for it. And realistically, a lot of the times when these people go out in public like this, a lot of the times they are about more about symbolism with things. Obviously, she says, like I said, she said it was about unity. But personally, I mean, I think it's a more of a play on the fact that, Joe Biden is being inaugurated, but just 2 weeks ago, there was a riot in the Capitol. And if you take a look at the backstory of the book series and everything like that, it takes place after a failed rebellion where each district is forced to sacrifice one boy and one girl. I think it was between the ages of 10 and 18, something like that, and they have to battle to the death. Obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. But, since she wore, the Hunger Games-like brooch, I think it's important to talk about the fact that our government, how our government in Washington is kind of similar to the Capitol in the Hunger Games. Other than Bernie Sanders, did anybody pay attention or notice the clothing that some of these people were wearing at the inauguration? Lady Gaga is very extravagant, like the girl on the Hunger Games, right? And Lady Gaga's always been that way, so I understand that, but I think it's Effie Trinket. I think that's the person's name. So Lady Gaga's always been that way, and all of her life, she's always been very extravagant. And I'm not going to go through the list of designers that they all wore, but much of the clothing was pretty pricey. Maybe it's because I'm pretty frugal and really cheap, but I don't think I would ever buy a $1,000 coat or even a $2,000 coat, even own multiple coats that would cost as much as some of these people were wearing. I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't have the same amount of money that these people do, but I think the extravagance of wealth shown sends the wrong signal to the American people that are currently struggling. Since we had almost 1 million people file for unemployment last week, I don't think it's a good signal to show people. Remember, Joe Biden is middle-class Joe. That's the idea that he's pushed to the people. He's not the symbol of extravagance, but it seems as though the people around him are wearing expensive brands. Although he did end up wearing a $7,000 Rolex to the inauguration, and that was all over Twitter at one point. Everybody giving him a lot of flack over that. I say all this stuff, and none of this is to take anything away from the accomplishments of the designers that actually made the clothing that those people wear. But I think that it needs to be discussed, this idea of just extravagance and wealth that Washington has, right? People call them the Washington elites. They're the decision makers. They, in my opinion, have kind of lost touch with Americans. As I said before, the extravagance of the government in Washington draws an eerie similarity to that of the extravagance of the Capitol in the Hunger Games. I think that they are all way too disconnected with the American people, and what they wore to the inauguration speaks volumes to that. The only person that appears to have some sort of sympathy to the way the American people are is the one person who became a meme sensation over the weekend, and that's Bernie Sanders. He wore mittens that were made by a school teacher from Vermont. He wore this Burton, down snowboarding jacket. The snowboarding jacket I think was priced somewhere between $100 to $500. I was having trouble finding exactly the price of the one that he has, but if it's a down jacket, down's pretty expensive to have. It's a little bit more pricey. It's not going to be $50 or $80 or something like that. So $500 isn't all that bad. I know earlier I was talking about how I wouldn't have a jacket that's $1,000 or $2,000, but I think most of the time those $1,000, $2,000 jackets, especially ones that were for this inauguration, I think those people are probably only going to end up wearing them one time and never wear it again. Bernie Sanders has probably worn this jacket every day for the last couple of weeks. So it's a difference in spending $500 on something that you're going to wear all the time and $2,000 on something that you're going to wear once or twice. So, personally, I'd probably part with $500 for a down jacket that would also be very functional in other areas other than the inauguration. So anyway, I think that Bernie Sanders displays a much better connection with Americans than many of the people that were on stage, even though Bernie Sanders does have a decent amount of money. But what the women wore, is always the one thing that people talk about as opposed to the policies that they represent. And I think that does a real disservice to everything, especially with Kamala Harris being the vice president. We need to not focus on what she's wearing, and what we should focus on is what she's doing. That's the same level of, I don't want to say necessarily respect, but that's the same level of attention we would pay to any man that was in the position. So something important to focus on there. We shouldn't care about what she's wearing. I'm talking about it because everything was expensive. Also, one thing to also note is, by the way, all those Burton jackets, they're starting to get sold out. I think they might all be sold out. And then the school teacher, from what I understand, she has no more mittens available. And then also Bernie Sanders was also photoshopped into pretty much every single picture that anybody could possibly Photoshop him into over the weekend. So I think that the fact that Bernie Sanders stole the show tells you everything you really need to know about what happened this week. Additionally, I think it's important to mention that AOC was not present at the inauguration. She was in New York doing something local, helping up there in New York. But I think that it's probably more that she doesn't like Joe Biden, and her man Bernie Sanders had the nomination stolen from him again. So possibly, this is a first show from a party member that is willing to split from the Democratic Party of unity. So, and honestly, she would probably be the first person to do it too. So enough on all that, enough on the inauguration and everything. Moving on, I have my last topic of the day, and this is news bias. I know that I talk about the news a lot, but I think it's important to discuss this because the news is how we figure out what's going on in the world. The reason that it's important is because when the news portrays itself as objective and only bringing you the truth, people have a tendency to believe that. But when the news programs bring their own implicit bias while reporting the news, it can change the way people receive that news. I don't think that there's any question that Fox News is right-leaning, and I don't think that there's any question that CNN is left-leaning. Both programs present their news as being viewed from their own perspective. But that's not necessarily objective. When you only have your own implicit bias while reporting a story, it can change the way the American people view that story. And I personally believe that not everything needs to be breaking news. Everyone is so quick to get the story out there that sometimes they run the risk of reporting things that are not completely accurate either. Maybe our news programs should wait a little bit before they completely put a story out there. Honestly, I have heard way too often that, a story will start with, "If true, this is big," right? That shouldn't happen, right? You shouldn't, as a news organization, you shouldn't say if true. News should be doing their due diligence and checking to see if it's true. But I've said this before, and I don't think that they have an incentive to fact check on everything. They need people to come to their website. They need people to come to their channel. They need people to go to their Twitter account, their Instagram. They need the attention to survive. That's how they get money. Don't get me wrong. I think that the news and journalists are doing good work. But I think that they have an obligation to the American people to be honest about what they're doing. What I mean by this is to stop saying that they are objective journalists and then report things with an obvious bias. I don't have a problem if a person comes out and says that they are a liberal and then report a story, and I don't have a problem if somebody comes out and says that they're conservative and then report a story. It's the people that come out and say that they don't have a bias and then report on a story. There's not a second that I would believe if someone reports on politics in the United States that doesn't have a bias, unless maybe that person is from another country and they're reporting on the United States policies back home. And even then, I think they would likely have a bias because U.S. policy affects the rest of the world so much. I would actually say it's probably impossible to not have a bias when reporting on news. All I want is for people to be honest about the bias that they have. I believe that journalists have the obligation to the American people to report on both parties and all politicians the same way. They should not be willing to cover a story that has minimal proof about one party and cover up a story that has substantial proof from a different party. If they're going to do that, then they need to come out and openly say and be honest about their bias. I have mentioned before that CNN having anchors on that have an obvious bias, but then turn around and say that they're objective people. And the same goes for Fox News. They both have an opinion section and a legit news section, but each section is written by a person that has a bias. Additionally, I think we as Americans have an obligation to also understand that we also have our own biases, and we need to do our due diligence by watching both CNN and Fox News. Now, I use CNN and Fox News in this because they're easy examples. And we should be watching both left-leaning and right-leaning news so that we can understand that we have a bias and that they have a bias, and we need to get information from multiple sources and multiple viewpoints so that we can understand what the truth is. One last thing, I didn't talk about the executive orders. I will get to that in a different episode. I wanted to do some more research on those to actually really understand what it is that they mean. But one thing that I didn't mention, or one thing that I want to mention about those, is this mask mandate that Joe Biden signed for federal lands. A lot of people have been giving him a hard time about this and how he's not wearing a mask at the Lincoln Memorial. And, that was after he signed this executive order. But the reality is, personally, I would much rather, if a person's going to be on camera, they don't need to wear a mask. I want to be able to see their mouth. I want to be able to see and hear, kind of read their lips and hear what it is that they're saying. And I think that somebody talking behind a mask is going to make it much more difficult, especially with Joe Biden. Historically, he's had some issues, especially more here recently. He's had some issues with his ability to speak and articulate things. So I think that that's kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But, I don't necessarily, agree with all the conservatives that are giving him a hard time about this. But a while ago, the Democrats and the liberal journalists were asking a lot of questions to Trump about why he wasn't wearing a mask. And the answer of, I'm tested every day, or we adhere to strict COVID precautions and all that kind of stuff wasn't a good enough answer. So I understand why reporters are asking him about this, but I still think that, he needs to, Joe Biden and then definitely the White House press secretary, I don't think they need to be wearing the masks. Maybe put up a plexiglass thing in between them or something like that to help, protect everybody from them or something. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But I think that's kind of dumb for people to give them a hard time about that. I'd much rather prefer to be able to see their mouth and everything like that, and not wearing a mask. So anyway, that's nothing. In closing, personally, I don't really like all of Joe Biden's policies, but I do hope that the country moves forward. I hope that the Democrats don't slam through legislation, because the only thing they're doing is setting a precedent for the party that is in power to end up doing that. But realistically, each party will end up taking advantage of the opportunity they have to push through their own policy and push that as far as they can while they have the power. Then, if they can't get the laws passed through Congress or the Senate, then the president will just continue to do executive orders. And we will then just become a country ruled by executive order. And the rules and laws will change based on whichever party has the presidency, which is also a problem, because we have essentially given all of the power to one person, as opposed to being actually represented by the hundreds of people that are in the Congress and the Senate. Which that ends up leading me to a question. Is the president an elected dictator, or is one man making all of the laws just a product of the system our government has created because they can't seem to figure out how to work together? So it's just something to think about. I don't know. So that's all I really have for today. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back next week.